Before we begin our podcast, I would just like to thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. And because before we get on to the questions, we would just like to give a short introduction about you. So we have with us here today Dr. Dibyadyuti Roy, who is an accomplished scholar with over a decade of experience working in interdisciplinary academia across the USA, the UK, and India. He has completed his PhD in Cultural Studies from West Virginia University and is currently an associate professor in Cultural Studies, Media Studies, and Digital Humanities at the University of Leeds. Before joining the team at Leeds, Dr. Roy was also a part of leading institutes in India, such as IIM Indore and IIT Jodhpur. His research interests include critical AI, algorithmic cultures, digital humanities, and post-colonial studies. Thank you so much for being here with us here today, sir.
Thank you, Taarina. Thank you, Krishna, for that very warm and kind introduction. I look forward to having a conversation with you. And of course, when I visited Christ University, I had a wonderful time interacting with your department. So, I look forward to the conversation.
So, sir, through your years of experience, how would you explain digital humanities to someone who has been studying humanities only in the traditional way?
Yeah, that's a good question, but also a question that has almost become a genre by itself in the digital humanities. So everyone tries to define digital humanities. I have myself published in quite a few volumes that come from the Debates in Digital Humanities series, where we've talked about this. So I'll start off with what is considered traditionally within the digital humanities as a standard narrative, right? So digital humanities is a convergent area of practices, so convergent field of practices rather, and this comes from Schnapp and Preschner's DH manifesto. And other people have defined DH as, applying, where the digital and the humanities intersect, or where coding and humanities intersect. But I'd like to kind of talk about digital humanities in a slightly different manner, to go back to a story. So one of the things that is considered a very important methodology in digital humanities is called something called distant reading, right? So distant reading is this idea that has been there for quite a while, but became part of the vocabulary or the lexicon of digital humanities in its current state. Of course, I can go back to the history of digital humanities when it was called humanities computing, starting off with Father Robert Tubusa and him creating a concordance of Saint Thomas of Aquinas's works. But I don't want to go back that far. I want to go back to 2011, when Franco Moretti decided to do a distant reading. Basically, he did not do a distant reading the way we understand it to be today, maybe. He decided to do a kind of network theory analysis of the murder of Gonzago in Hamlet, that particular scene. And I'm using that because, as a Department of Literary and Cultural Studies, I assume that you and your colleagues would probably appreciate this example. And so what he was trying to do was to understand from that particular scene who was the primary character in Hamlet. And he made all the characters into nodes, and all of the conversations between the characters became the edges. And not surprisingly, it was found out that Hamlet is the key character. And then all of his friends came to him, his academic friends, and this is the way it's talked about, and asked him, why would you do something that we already knew about? Now, his response was, and in many ways, I'm paraphrasing that the goal of digital humanities or distant reading is not to kind of supplant or kind of take away the expertise of the human researcher, of the human inquiry, but rather to see whether the machine can provoke new insights. And this, of course, has been also talked about in Matthew Korchenbaum's famous essay, The Remaking of Reading. So fundamentally, I think I don't like the term traditional humanities versus digital humanities. I particularly find that it is about the politics of reading. So for me, that's always been how I define the digital humanities. For me, it's about how reading practices have changed across the era. And in fact, we often think of print as a normative medium, but print is hardly a technology that's been there for the last 600, 700 years. We've always read in very different ways. So I think our ways of reading are remediated, or they are changed according to the technology that is there at that point of time. And uh, and technology, again, going back to the root of the word technology, it comes from teshni, which means making. So any act of making is an act of technology. So therefore, I think, for me to summarize, I see digital humanities as the adaptation of humanistic inquiry to read the very different technologies that we have to mediate our culture. So that's how I would define digital humanities.
Right. So it all comes down to digital humanities being something that complements the way we usually study humanities, right, sir?
Yeah, I don't even know whether I'd say compliment. I would say it is humanities, right? So all digital humanists at the core, right? Um, our point of departure is humanistic inquiry. And humanistic inquiry is fundamentally concerned with questions around society, culture, ethics, and our environmental situation, surroundings, that determine, what makes us human, to be absolutely true. So I don't even want to say it's compliments. As you might know, the word digital humanities is actually a marketing term, because it was known as humanities computing for a very long time, and then I believe in 2009, I might be getting the dates incorrect, but William Panapaker, he was looking for a term. I believe he was the president of MLA, Modern Language Association, at this point of time. He was looking for a new term, and I think he hit upon digital humanities. So whether you look at it as humanities computing, whether you look at it digital humanities, there are practices that are able to bring in traditional humanistic inquiry and kind of map it into those questions around what does it mean to be human, what does it mean to live in a society that is structured around human values, ethics, morals. So therefore, I think that is how I would think it. I think it's, if you can call it a compliment, I'm sure that that might be a way of doing it. I just see it as a continuation, but maybe in a different. So it's almost like, if you have a classroom and you have one class happening there, and then you're part of the same program, but then you have a second course that's part of that same program, and it moved to a different classroom. So the classroom maybe has changed, right? The boards have changed, but the conversations remain the same.
Right, sir. So coming more closer home, where do you think India should be directing its efforts in DH to generate meaningful knowledge from its own contexts?
I think that's a good question, and the honest answer is that I feel uncomfortable in using the broad term India to cover an entire discipline. I think India is a subcontinent. India is a country of 1.5 billion people. So, and we are blessed with diversity. We are blessed with various knowledge traditions, various cultures, and the way we think about it. So I think it's unfair to use one narrative to think about digital humanities in India. But something that I have always found important to think about is the logic of knowledge production. Right? So, and in following that logic of knowledge production, one of the things that India lacks, because of our histories of colonization, histories of epistemic injustice, epistemic colonization, is that we lack good archives. And which is why you would see that digital archives and the creation of digital archives occupy a very important part in, I would say, majority world digital humanities. And majority world is a term that we use now for global south, and this is a term that was used by the Bangladeshi photographer Shahidul Alam, because his claim was, why should we call ourselves the third world or the global south when majority of the world's population lives in our spaces? So if you look at majority world digital humanities, of which India definitely occupies a very important portion, I think we need to look at not just indigenous knowledge systems, but rather the logic of knowledge production itself. So often when we look at archives, archives always reflect the, if I might use that word, the ideology of the archivist as well, right? So it's very important that the process of archiving becomes democratized, which means that the community must play a very important role in letting their archive be developed by themselves. So it's a difficult task. It's a difficult task. So when you ask me the question, what should India do? Again, I won't say India. I would say that we are blessed uh, with numerous knowledge systems, but also numerous ways of knowledge production. And I think often when we think of digital archives, knowledge production becomes less important than the knowledge itself. So that logic of knowledge production must be must be emphasized. And when we are archiving local communities, we must also then invite the archive to be built by the community itself. And there is where I think we can be an absolute model. And I don't think we want to do it for becoming a model. We want to do it for the benefits it has for our country. And that way, I think need more resources. Obviously, institutions need more resources. I think both governmental as well as institutional resources need to come in. And the other thing, I think currently there is a lot of techno positivism around digital humanities, which is where, it's very important to learn coding. Personally, I think coding, like writing, is an act of critical thinking. So the act of being able to code is actually similar to how I see writing, right? Your critical thinking processes, how you logically think, becomes manifested in your coding and writing capabilities. But often, when we imagine digital humanities nowadays, it seems that people are learning coding uncritically. And what do I mean by that? I mean that um, you want to learn Python, and you want to learn Python because you want to solve a humanistic question, right? It's not about mapping a programming language or your skills in a programming language uncritically to so it's not like, oh, I have a lot of data, I will visualize it. The question is, why will I visualize it? Who will it benefit? Who does it go out to? Right? So those questions, right? What is my research question? Does my research question require close reading? Does it require distant reading? Does it require a combination of both distant and close reading? And if it does, go and do distant reading, go and do close reading. So again, let the perspective in digital humanities emerge from the humanistic query that we have. And I think that's where India can, or Indian institutions, and I'm going to take a subset of India, I'm going to take Indian pedagogical institutions where digital humanities is being taught right now, and say that that's where we can stand apart from the rest of the world or other places where there is often a techno positivist assumption, but also the logic of knowledge production, as I said, has been discounted. It's only the knowledge that counts, not the logic of how that knowledge is produced. So those are the two things that come to my mind.
Okay, sir. So, to add a new segment to the question that was asked previously, how have your international experiences shaped your approach to digital humanities and media studies? And what are the differences in approaches to digital humanities in all these places?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So as I was responding to the previous question, I feel digital humanities is extremely context specific. And I'm sure that's true for all disciplines. But particularly with digital humanities, because the emergence of digital humanities, like many other humanities disciplines that came to post colonial or majority world countries through Western epistemes and Western ontologies, digital humanities often is perceived through a non-Indian lens. What do I mean by that? By that mean we often uncritically adopt the definitions and paradigms of digital humanities that have not been developed in India. So I think there has been a lot of work done on what we understand to be post-colonial digital humanities. And post-colonial digital humanities is based within the particular context. So my understanding of doing work in India, US, and the UK is that every space has its own questions and its own affordances. So the word I would like to think about is digitality, right? So by which I mean how are digital affordances realized in particular contexts. So if you ask me what is different, I'll possibly respond to that question by saying that let's look at who is the digital humanities rather than what is digital humanities. So for me, if I broadly follow the classification that digital humanities is about mapping traditional humanistic inquiry onto digital tools, techniques, and objects. So if I take, for example, tools, right? So tools would be someone who's a computational humanist, right? And for computational humanities, your research question is based on a computational platform. So for example, if you're trying to um, scrape social media to find out how is a particular conversation around a particular topic being talked about, say for example, I don't know, the most recent cultural phenomenon, which could be anything, which could be the most recent you know popular. So India winning the Women's World Cup, right? So if you want to understand how are people thinking about it online, and that requires you to scrape data, but you also realize that your site of inquiry is digital platforms, and that therefore means that you are asking questions that are based there. So this is the work of the digital humanist. If you then think of techniques, which is kind of creating digital archives, right, and you're trying to get things together, and and often digital archives are created specifically to meet scholarly goals. This is opposed to why a digital collection and digital archive are different. And then finally you have digital cultures, when you look at digital objects, for example games, when you look at movies, etc. Now, I give these three definitions to say that depending on the context, for example, the US digital humanities that I saw had a lot of focus on how do you use coding and computational humanities to develop these questions around digital humanities. But of course, there is also quite a bit of focus, depending on which kind of institution you are in the US, on creating archives. In fact, my first entry into digital humanities was through the Center for Literary Computing, at where I did my PhD from West Virginia University, where I worked on a digital archive of creating an archive of all the syllabi that was being created in the university. Then I worked on computer gaming across cultures. Of course, then currently in the UK, I work a lot with archival collections and how algorithms are working in archival collections, right? So what is the difference between human curatorial authority and algorithmic curatorial authority? So that's also because the UK has a lot of emphasis on the GLAM sector, the galleries, libraries, archives, museum sector, and which means that there's at Leeds, for example, we have an amazing special collections. So the question around archives becomes very important. So again, as I said, I don't think I have a singular answer for you that where should we, or how do you separate. I think it depends on the context you are in. So the context that I am in kind of changes the questions around digital humanities for me. And for So I would like to say that from my experience in these three countries, and that's purely a personal opinion, these are the kinds of ways I have encountered digital humanities. I'm sure somebody who's had a similar experience like me in three different countries, or even the same three countries, India, US, and the UK, would have experienced digital humanities differently. And you asked the question around media studies. I think how I come to media studies is firstly as a cultural theorist and then a digital humanist. So for me, media studies is absolutely crucial because I looked at the act of mediation. So for me, mediation is fundamental to how I understand media studies. So and I don't follow the prescriptive models of media theory that say that audiences are of a certain kind. I follow a model of media studies where I'm looking more at how it is constituted rather than how it is affecting. So I hope, I know it's a long answer, but I hope that answers your question. Okay. Yeah.
So moving on, looking ahead, what are you most excited about in your research for the future?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think, as some of you might know, during my visit, I spoke of my current area of work, which is critical AI studies. And that is what I'm excited about, essentially, because um, my work is in the cultural politics of artificial intelligence, and rather what I see as modern artificial intelligence, because it might be useful to remember Kranzberg law, which says technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. So, tracing the histories of artificial intelligence, looking at how modern AI, the word AI itself comes from, is a marketing term, very honestly, because in 1956, when John McCarthy, who was at Dartmouth, created this term, he was essentially trying to get funding for a conference, along with four of his colleagues, Nathaniel Rochester, Claude Shannon, Marvin Minsky from MIT. And since then, we have gone through three AI hype cycles, if not more. And those AI hype cycles have all been based in different models of artificial intelligence. And what we understand to be artificial intelligence currently is actually, we are basically thinking of generative AI. And generative AI is a very small subset of artificial intelligence. You have artificial intelligence, you have machine learning subset is deep learning, a subset of deep learning is generative AI. So the politics of how learning takes place, does learning really takes place, what is the politics of intelligence, how does it work out, these are the questions that critical AI studies works at. And of course, critical AI studies brings into emphasis the materiality and the labor and the environmental costs of what we call as modern AI. So these are all humanistic questions, as I'm sure you recognize. And this is something that I'm greatly excited about. I teach a course on the cultural politics of artificial intelligence at Leeds. I'm also the co-founder of a India-based collective called Critical Lens on AI in Majority Worlds Claim, with two of my colleagues, Vasundhara and Lavanya, and Tushar, actually. So all of us, and this runs as an advocacy group and a reading group, and we have over 250 members right now. So I'm excited about this particular trajectory because I think modern AI makes visible a lot of things in terms of labor and materiality that were often invisibilized. And yeah, again, as I said, I'm a cultural analyst of dominant technologies, so it's an exciting time as a researcher.
And so, lastly, what advice would you want to give young researchers who want to study digital cultures and
Think, Tarina, I think your
Okay, yes, sorry, sir. I'll repeat the question again. So, what advice would you want to give young researchers who want to study digital humanities and culture?
firstly, I'm not a good person to ask that question. I don't like giving advice, right? I think people should discover their own interests. I feel um, it's unfair for anyone to give advice in terms. But one thing that I'd just point out in terms of paths forward, I think anyone who wants to just focus on digital culture, I think that's possibly not a great idea, because I don't see digital and analog cultures as separate. In fact, going back to Turing's famous essay, Computing Machinery and Mind, he says, digital is just a convenient fiction. Everything is ultimately analog. So, for example, the case I talk about in my classroom is that, we have this muscle in our forearm, the communist digital extensor muscle. And I think that allowed us to first, kind of curl our fingers into our palm, into a fist, and point towards the world. So, our fingers do what binary digits do, right? They index our social reality, this social and cultural reality. So, to keep in mind that ultimately the digital is only a kind of, it's the same side of, it's the two sides of the same coin, right? So you cannot have the digital without the analog, and without the analog you can't have the digital. For example, a great example would be a cloud, right? What is a cloud? We often think of this amorphous thing called a cloud on which our all information networks run. So a cloud is not composed of something that's up in the air. A cloud is composed of, millions and millions of zettabytes of data that are based in physical servers, data centers. And those data centers are connected through transatlantic cables that run below the sea. And so look at the materiality of analog systems that actually enables our digital systems. And it's not one or the other, it's the entire thing that's the cloud, right? So this is a potent example to talk about how we should think about digital cultures. Digital cultures are always already in conversation with analog culture. So I think a humanist should come, or a researcher should come with a humanistic question. And if that requires them to focus on a particular aspect of digitality, they should do that. But they should always keep in mind that there is, you cannot hermetically seal digital cultures into one boundary, right? So I think that's something that they should keep in mind. And again, try to approach problems or research questions from a multidisciplinary vantage point. That's very important because real world problems don't come with disciplines attached. So this is, I think, a huge strength of digital humanities because it allows so many disciplines to come together, and that's where a major positive is, right? Like, you are not bound by disciplinary constraints, which often makes methodological singularity difficult. But it also allows for conversations, and I think that is the major strength of digital humanities, that it allows multiple disciplines, multiple epistemic positions, multiple ontologies of the humanities to come together and be in conversation, which is often not found because academia by nature is quite insular. We like being in our silos. So I think digital humanities, as long as it doesn't become a silo itself, which I pointed out some of those problems, but if digital humanities is able to be rather that inclusive community rather than becoming a silo, I think that's where a researcher who's trying to research digital culture or culture in general will really benefit.
Thank you so much, sir. Um, this was the end of the questions that we had for today. So thank you so much for answering all of them very aptly and also for joining us for this podcast.
Thank you, Karina. Always a pleasure, and I look forward to being in conversation with colleagues and students at Christ University. You're doing a wonderful job, and the MA in English with BA as a specialization, I think that will go do really well. Already doing well. So congratulations to you and all colleagues and students there. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.